All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another one of our video series here on LinkedIn. I'm really happy to have Josh Wilson, our Senior Vice President of Service Lines and Technology, here with us to talk about an exciting topic, I think. Josh, welcome.
Hey, no, thanks. I appreciate it, Adam.
Before we dive into how software innovation will change government consulting, could you give the folks out there just a sense of what you do at LMI?
Yeah, sure. So at LMI, we're in a typical, consulting matrix. So on one side of the matrix, I have my colleague Pete Flugrath, who's the Chief Growth Officer, and he thinks about customers all day and all night. That's what he worries about is, are we doing what we told them we were going to do, and are they happy with that experience and kind of that aspect of our business, and we love that because it's creates intense focus on that. But at the same time, we need the other side of our business to be focused on, potentially what our customers aren't thinking about that they should be, anticipating those demands. And we need folks that are super focused on delivering an incredible employee experience. So that's me. I sit over our service lines, so logistics, management, advisory, digital and analytics solutions, and our CTO organization, where we run R&D programs, academic research, and other things that we think benefit our government customers in meaningful ways.
Thanks. It's a great summation of LMI. So diving in, what do you see as the traditional model of government consulting and software procurement? And how have you seen it change over the last decade or so?
Yeah. So first, I have to say I love your background, but it's so misleading, Adam. All right, we're not the top place to work. Okay, we were the number one place to work. Okay, we have to work on that. But look, I would say, really in the last 5 years, right? I would point to, over 5 years ago, the government started kind of adopting this concept of platforms as a service, right? And infrastructure as a service. And we have, folks like AWS and Microsoft and Google to think for the cloud, right? But essentially what the cloud has done is it's allowed a startup, any company really, to jump into the technology business and build services on top of platforms that can be configured around a broad range of needs, right? But if you think about how that affects our government customers, it's a huge opportunity. But to really take advantage of it, there's things from how we budget to how we deliver capabilities in the federal government that are still built on this concept of, I have a need, I'm going to go think about requirements for that need for a long period of time, and then I'm going to budget over the next 6 years exactly what that thing is going to cost to deliver this end item that I'm going to get at the end of the day, which is a ship or a weapon system or some new ERP system, right? But what's happened with these platforms is it's really testing the limits of that model, because these things can be configured around a broad range of things. We're talking about ServiceNow, Salesforce, AWS, Azure, et cetera, Databricks, Spark Cognition, Palantir. These are platforms, right, that can be configured around a broad set of needs. And what our government customers have done is they've acquired these platforms, right? They have these platforms now. And now as needs come in, the traditional model would be, I have a new need. This is now something that needs a capability that needs to be developed. The way the model has traditionally worked is, okay, I go work on a statement of work and a bunch of thou shall statements, and I work with users to kind of do the best we can on what those requirements are. And then I set up an acquisition strategy to then go and compete for somebody to bid on that. But if you have a platform that has an authority to operate and has access to all the data sitting right there that can be turned on in that moment, right? And you could rapidly configure around that new need. Yes, that's a deployment of a new capability, but to do that at the pace of need, I can't go back to the old model where I go work on requirements and set up a new acquisition, right? I need to set up a model that takes advantage of these platforms and deliver that need. And I think what you're seeing is the government's being tested today. The traditional models at which we acquire capabilities and deliver capabilities, as it relates to software, those models are being tested.
So how do you relate what you just said to innovation, right? If you're a government customer and you've purchased a platform, but that platform doesn't do exactly what you need it to do, how are you seeing the government address that need without going through this long traditional acquisition process? And what is the role of software innovation and the broader government consulting community in helping to address that need?
Well, the challenge is we often think about, often the acquisition community, what I see across the public sector is the acquisition community obviously catches the brunt of not being agile enough, right? And candidly, there are things in the acquisition community that could do to lean more forward on the agile front, no question. But the reality is a lot of these acquisition professionals, to be successful, they have to be successful in the budgeting processes that they participate in. And although we've done a lot to change how we deliver software capabilities, there's still, and move away from waterfall type approaches, there's still a long way to go in relation to how we budget for the delivery of new capabilities and software, right? A lot of how we budget for new capabilities, as even software capabilities, is still very traditionally waterfall, right? So if you think about that, we're doing, traditional customer that we work with, and I think most of my colleagues across industry work with, when they say they have some new software or digital capability need, candidly, 9 times out of 10, they have a pain point. But in regards to how to really organize around that pain point or that opportunity to improve their business, they don't really know what they need, they want and need until they experience it, until they put their hands on it. And that's essentially what Agile does, right? It iteratively allows you to develop capability, let them put their hands on it, experience it. And then as that happens, clarity starts kind of setting in as you move through this process around what you really need and building something that aligns the expectations. Whereas, when we all read the thou shalt statements, right, in a statement of work or et cetera, I liken it to, and you work on requirements for 6 months with different users, and that passes up and down from the budgeting people to the acquisition people to the end users to the managers. I liken it to, when I was in kindergarten, they used to do the games where you have 13 kids line up and you say green giraffe, and they pass the message down and it ends up being a purple elephant, right? And so the idea of Agile is to create this intimate relationship between these end users and the people developing the solution. Well, if you think about that from a budget, I have to turn in a budget for over the next 6 years. So I have to tell you when I'm going to turn off systems, leave them on, et cetera. I got to tell you what functionality we're going to deliver by when, and I got to give you a work breakdown structure for that and build up a cost for that. And I got to turn in my homework, right, for what money I'm going to need for the next 3 or 4 years. That is diabolically opposed to delivering software, in an agile way. But to answer your question, and to be fair to our government colleagues, we have incredible leaders in OSD R&E, in the HASC and SAS, throughout the DoD, in civilian agencies, and et cetera, that are fully aware of this challenge and the need to move faster, right? And they've done a couple things. One program that I'm personally super excited about and championing it's called the BA8 concept, and it's really BA8's about. Today, in that example I gave you about a platform that can be configured around a lot of needs, we built this, we have Palantir, or we have ServiceNow, or we have Salesforce, or we have AWS, and a new need, and it was deployed to solve a certain problem. And then COVID happens, and I need a new app, right? Well, today, we have to be very careful. Are you using RDT&E dollars for that? New development dollars for that? Or are you doing O&M? Well, this program was funded with O&M. Well, now we got to go find RDT&E dollars because this is a new function that it wasn't intended to program. And you can get into what's called ADA violations if you're not careful, right? Well, the BA8 program is all about the recognition that we need a separate appropriation, a separate funding line for software delivery that generally, it doesn't recognize a difference between O&M and RDT&E. It's a recognition that software, truly, if we're doing it and delivering it correctly, never just lands in the sustainment world and stays there. There's always modernization, new features, and et cetera, if we want to be able to create incredible customer experiences. And so the software acquisition pathway is another thing that leaders across government have implemented, especially in the DoD, around, recognizing that, the JSIDS process may not work when we're talking about delivering software, right, at the pace of need. And that's another program that really is a more agile approach to how we deliver software. So I don't want to paint a picture that our government doesn't see this need, because I think they do, and I think they're working hard to address it. And I think it's going to be really exciting when programs like this get integrated into, more holistically across what I would call like core programs.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot in these series of videos about business and digital transformation, and something that sparked in my head when you were talking is the government also thinking about the need to constantly or consistently incorporate those kinds of requirements into this innovative approach to acquiring software? Because we've talked a lot about the sort of art and science of software adoption. So are you seeing sort of a commensurate linkage between those two ideas, or are we still a few years away from rethinking how those sorts of services that enable the software are acquired?
Sorry, one more time, Adam. Like, try to ask that a different way. Sorry.
So is the government thinking about buying the services that go with the software differently?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So look, like, as we always talk about when does utopia happen in regards to delivering a digital transformation, right? And utopia tends to happen when you have these folks that have incredible, what I would call, domain or mission knowledge, right? Like in the LMI thing, we're pretty proud of, one area we're really proud of is, obviously logistics. It's a big part of our history. We really understand logistics. We understand the data that a lot of our, whether it's Postal Service, GSA, anywhere in the DoD, Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, it doesn't matter. Like, we've been doing this a long time. We understand your systems that you use. We understand the business problems they support, processes they support. We really have a lot of functional domain knowledge. And when it comes to building, like, digitally transforming how you deliver capabilities in those domains, when you can put like those folks, those technologists together with an organization that really understands that, that's really where you're cooking with gas, as they would say, right? And delivering a lot of value. Whereas if you bring in an incredible technology company that really has to spend a lot of time getting spun up on how that domain really works and limitations, expectations, system, data, et cetera, you don't deliver as fast as you could, right? So it's really about bringing those two things together. Well, if you look at where the government in the past is like, I have a new capability, waterfall, I'm going to start building this software from scratch, and then go hire somebody that can build that software from scratch. But as these platforms come on, Advana, in the DoD example, I would say like Advana, Vantage, Create, et cetera. These platforms, Platform One, right? These platforms are now going to be things that the national security community are going to build scale around, right? They're going to build scale around a common set of tools. Take it out of, like, imagine if all of us every time you showed up to a new organization on the commercial side, or when I was still in uniform, and they were using a different version of Excel built by a different company, right? That you now had to get spun up on. Like, I think our world, or a different version of Microsoft Outlook, right? I think our world would stop, right? And so the idea is like, every time when I show up in the Army, as an example, I show up to a new organization, and some form of analytics needs to be done. Wouldn't it be great if we were building scale around a common set of tools? And I think what the government's now seeing is, as they bring on these platforms, and we want these, to build scale around these platforms, I think what you'll see in the near future is IDIQs and things like that allow them to bring people on with the necessary functional and soft and technology knowledge to be able to deliver value against these platforms. And it'll be less, hey, come in, stand up the infrastructure, build the tools, build the software, et cetera. It'll be, no, come in, use these platforms that we already have, and deliver solutions around these logistics problems at the pace of need. Does that make sense? Which is a very different than starting from scratch, which is kind of how things happened in the past.
It does make sense. So it kind of dovetails into my next question. Uh, how will this change impact the consulting industry? And can you talk a little bit about why LMI has decided to strategically invest in things like the Forge, our internal software accelerator? How does that model better get after what you think the government's future needs are going to be? And how will those solutions out of that software accelerator mesh with the common platform approach that you just described government agencies employing?
Yeah, look, there's different business models out there, right? Obviously, AWS, Databricks, and other companies out there have different ways they're going to go. They're about IP, right? Intellectual property, their platform, delivering value. They want to sell licenses and software, and et cetera. And there's other companies, both on the consulting side, that want to get into that business too, right? Of selling solutions as a service, licensing model, and et cetera. At LMI, what we're seeing is the problems that we want to organize around, that we think our functional background gives us an advantage, a unique advantage, and honestly positions us to have a very unique impact on our customers. Right? We're gonna bring the technology prowess to do that, and to get people confident. Back to my old example of, how did we do this when I first got into this industry a long time ago? Customer to communicate a problem, we'd go work on a white paper, and we'd come back to them and say, here's how we would organize around your problem, right? But the reality is they have platforms that they've built scale around, that they have a lot of investment into today, and et cetera. And they're trying to show that these platforms are driving value and that they are building scale around them. So what we realized really quickly in this digital age is, where things move a lot faster, and we give confidence, because essentially we sell trust. We don't sell widgets, right? We sell trust. All of us in this industry, even the software players, they're selling trust. Like, you can trust us that we'll solve this problem. Well, we add a ton of trust when we don't show up with a white paper today. It's when we show up with something that, to my earlier example, they can put their hands on, that really demonstrates that we understand the challenge, we understand the limitations of their architecture today and their data that's available in their systems, and even policy and regulations that they have to operate from within. And we give them user experiences that they can touch, and gain confidence that we understand their challenge, that moves well beyond a white paper. And that's really what the Forge is for us. The Forge is how we instill trust, that we understand your problem, that we can put a viable solution. So we often talk about where we are, and I think management consulting organizations that want to remain relevant, like, you have to be insanely focused on time to value. It's not about predicting the perfect solution that the customers may need 3 years from now and working on that app that you're going to give them. It's about, and we're advising all our customers that are in the technology delivery business, within all the organizations we support, like, your obsession needs to be on time to value. Like, we talk often back here at LMI, innovation at the pace of change. Like, you're not going to predict COVID. You're not going to predict Ukraine. You're not, as we palm things 6 years out. But what you can do is you can build an ecosystem that can rapidly innovate faster, hopefully, than our adversaries in a lot of cases, around these challenges as they present themselves, right? So the Forge is about not a think tank or an R&D organization thinking about the problems 10 years from now. It's about the things that are hitting our customers in the forehead in this moment that they have to have an answer around quickly. The Forge is about putting demos and prototypes and architectures in front of them that recognizes the limitations of regulations, data, architecture, existing technology, and gives them a viable solution they can move forward on as fast as possible. And what's unique is, like, we don't care where the best answer comes from. We are not obsessed on the IP front. We're obsessed with time to value. So in those meetings, a lot of our customers may show up and they'll experience, there will be startups in that room with us. There will be academic partners in that room with us, along with the Forge, where we have full-time engineers, product designers, architects, and et cetera. And literally, their entire job is to be reach back for all our LMI project managers, program managers, consultants, and et cetera, to say my customer is having this big problem that's really disrupting their mission or their challenge. The Forge is all about being able to put viable solutions in front of them as fast as possible to give their customers confidence that this is a viable way to solve that problem and move forward.
That makes a lot of sense. In our few minutes that we have left, if you had to summarize this conversation, if you were talking to a senior leader on the government side, let's say that senior leader is convinced, what are sort of the three key takeaways that you would leave with that leader in terms of how they might want to change their approach to thinking about buying and building around software?
Look, we're in the age, I gave this talk the other day at West Point to a bunch of great cadets, right? And I showed them a big infographic. It was a big circle, and it was like $118 billion. And I said, that's how much venture capital is spent on 9,000 different startup bets in the year 2018. And I drew a little circle in the bottom right. It was 22 point something $billion. I can't remember exactly. That was NASA's entire budget in 2018. And that is a small circle inside of that. And I said that 3.4 billion, I was like, that's DARPA's entire budget in 2018, right? So like the idea is, most of these bets are around what I would call low code platforms, right? It's about allowing people to digitally transform the processes and deliver solutions in as low a code as possible, right? So you're going to see, so platforms as a service, like being able to use low code software as a service and platforms to organize around a broad set of things that you can't predict, is the type of organization and ecosystem you need to put in place, right? So as you think about, things like I talked about earlier, the BA8, and you think about the new levers that the government are putting in place that allow you to more agilely take advantage of platforms as a service, and you think about how you want to do that, I would be hiring a lot of product designers. I would not folks that are super, just experts on writing statements of work and acquisition strategies. I would put them in a room with product designers as well. And I would start showing up at industry days with high fidelity mock-ups and architectures that give people understanding on the industry side of, when I land on day one, what platforms am I going to land on? What data architectures am I going to land on? What do you really need? And show up with high fidelity mock-ups that people are already bought into and excited about. And say, man, yeah, if you guys build that, that'll solve my problem. And focus on that, right? Reducing the risk around, am I delivering what end users really want and need? And am I building acquisition strategies that allow me to bring in the developers with the functional knowledge that's necessary to take advantage of the technology platforms I'm invested in and deliver at the pace of need, and worry a lot less about predicting what is going to hit you in the forehead 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and worry a lot more about having an ecosystem that can just deliver against a broad range of possible needs. That's philosophically kind of the culture and the mechanisms we like to try to help our customers put in place.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I think we're going to have many more in the future, Josh, and I look forward to it. Thank you for joining, and thank you to everyone who listened in. We're going to be having another LinkedIn Live next week on leadership lessons learned from some of our LMIers who have served at the top levels of the federal government, including the White House. So stay tuned for that. And otherwise, have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone. Thanks, Josh.
Everybody noticed that was our CEO walking up and down the stairs carrying stuff,
Everyone pitches in at LMI.
Yeah, Doug's not afraid to get his hands dirty, So anyway, all right. Hey, Adam, really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone that did have time to join. Appreciate it. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you.